But there's another meaning of the word growth, which is probably closer to what you're interested in, personal growth, development, maturing. But the reality is that you can't be active about everything. You have to kind of select and choose. And that is where the optimism comes in, is envisioning something and then believing that you could make it real. So generally people see optimism as kind of a temperament, sunny view. And I think there is some of that, and I have a natural amount of it. But over time, I've actually become even more optimistic than my general tendency, deliberately. It's kind of like a learned optimism. And I think the reason we should be as optimistic as we can is because it is how we make really good things, good complicated things. So it's hard enough. Well, I mean, it's very hard to make good complicated things work because generally there's more ways things can fail than they can succeed. And it's very unlikely that we're going to make something really good that's complicated inadvertently. They're hard to do, so we have to kind of see it and believe that it can be done. And that is where the optimism comes in, is envisioning something and then believing that you could make it real. Because when we look back on history, and that's where a lot of my optimism comes, we realize that most of the things that we have now have been made by people who are optimistically viewing that it was possible to make them and believe that they were going to make them and could imagine them. So I think of it as a work of imagination, where you kind of imagine a good scenario, which is harder to do than imagining a scenario where it fails or collapses. It is much easier to imagine how things break than it is to see how they work. And that's why entrepreneurs and all the others are rightly lauded, because they're going against that grain. It is hard to imagine how we could have this thing that seems like it is improbable. And most things that work are improbable. That's the definition from the Santa Fe complexity theory, is that things breaking down is the probable. Complicated things working are improbable by definition. And so you're against the improbable, and that work of imagining the improbable and having the improbable succeed and believing it can is optimism, which means that the optimists are the ones who shape our future. So I like to give a little story of like a car, and you need to have brakes on the car to steer the car.
Yeah, I'm with you so far.
But the engine is actually the more important element. And so there are people and there are organizations and there are methods that are going to be doing the braking. And I think they're essential. I want brakes in the car. But I just feel that the brake can overwhelm and cause stagnation, and that we also want to remember to focus on making the engine even stronger. So I emphasize the engine. But the reality is that you can't be active about everything. You have to kind of select and choose. I mean, I can be passive about it because there is another group of people that is active.
And you know that a group is active.
Right. So one of the major things for me was, the more I thought about the future, the more I became interested in history. And the more I read history, the more the reality of progress became. And I think just acknowledging the reality of progress would go a large, huge step in helping our optimism. This is a better place to live than at any time in the past. And this is the kind of Obama test. I don't know if you heard about that, but it's like if you were to be born randomly in any time period, it could be male, female, poor, rich, you're totally at random on some average thing. What time do you want to live in? What time period? And like, there's no way you would want to be anything before at least 50 years ago, and maybe not even within 50 years. And so, because we intuitively understand that this is actually the best time to be alive, but there is a recognition of like, what are the currents that made that? What has allowed that? What's operating? Is it still going? And from my view of history, and I had the chance to live in the past, it's very, very clear that we've been on a momentum and a trajectory of progress. And it's possible that could stop tomorrow. It's highly unlikely that it's going to stop tomorrow. So there is just all the conditions that make that suggest that it will continue. And so part of our optimism can come from that. There's a movement called degrowth, the degrowth movement. So these are people who basically see the troubles of the world, and particularly climate, when coming from our addiction to growth. Growth is kind of the consumer capitalistic kind of idea that they grow. And they're saying it's finite. We can't continue to grow. And we have to degrowth, stop growing. There's a little bit of a confusion in English because there's two meanings of the word growth. There's growth to add more pounds, to add more and more stuff, to get bigger, wider, heavier. But there's another meaning of the word growth, which is probably closer to what you're interested in, personal growth, developing, maturing.
Or knowledge growth.
Knowledge growth. That's not really accounted for. And so we can change how we account for things. We start to measure something different, just other than expansion, the more stuff. So we need some new metrics. So yes, I am optimistic that we can change our understanding and what we aim for. It's not inevitable though. And that experience of seeing what you get when you had development in technology, and of course you could see all the challenges and problems, but the main thing that I learned from that experience is thing that we get choices and options. That's ultimately what we get from the technology. But you had a choice for the first time of what you could do. And maybe, not then, but now, if you took that bus ride, you might be a web designer, a yoga teacher, a mortgage broker, whatever. You have choices. And that's what they did not have. There might be a little bit of semantics here because I would say that it will replace many tasks, but not their job.
Okay.
So this is what AI does, it replaces tasks. There are tasks that we do. Most jobs are complex of different tasks. And a lot of these tasks will go to the AI, but not necessarily the job.
Okay.
So the job will shift and you'll have different tasks. Part of that strength is that I would actually maybe even expand this even broader. And I welcome feedback on this. My claim would be that I don't think there's anybody in any field that's lost their job because of AI so far. There's tasks that have gone away, but not jobs. And a lot of the worry about this AI is what I call third-person worry. They're saying, my job probably, I'm not going to be replaced, but I can imagine somebody else, or maybe I can imagine my friend losing it, but I'm still waiting for someone to say, I lost my job. A real person with a real name who lost their job because of AI. And so far, I haven't. I've maybe even offered like a $200 bounty if you can tell me the name, specific person who lost their job because of AI of any sort. I've seen this. It's like you would take a walk out into nature and just see a beautiful scene. It's like, I'm just enjoying this.